Okay, here is EQ2 of the brain. How does structure of the brain help with this function? So first we're going to talk about the meninges. If you've heard of someone who has meningitis, right? It's a infection of the meninges, which is the protective layer around both the um, brain and the spinal cord. Provides the brain with nutrients. Brain is mostly made of fatty tissue, so there's not blood flow for the most part to the center of the brain. So this is where the meninges comes in. You can see where it provides the blood flow and the nutrients for the brain. So it's made up of three separate layers. The dura mater, which is the outermost layer. It's fibrous. You can see sort of the fibrous area there. The arachnoid matter, which is a thin web-like membrane, and then the pia mater, which is very thin, and it's the innermost layer. Between the arachnoid and the pia mater is where the cerebral spinal fluid will lay, which is more it's to help with the cushioning. And so anytime that you do a spinal tap, or if you hear of that, that's the fluid that they get. And if they do a epidural in the they'll try to get the drug into there because that's what the blood flow is. Okay, so the spinal cord passes down through the vertebral column. It's made up of inner neurons. We've learned that before, right? We have the motor neurons that go from the muscle to the spinal cord, and then we have this. Well, I'm sorry. So the sensory neuron goes from the the senses to the spinal cord, and then the motor neurons go from the spinal cord to the muscles. The peripheral nerves branch from the spinal cord, so we learned about the periphery before, so those are considered the spinal nerves. The brain is made up of three parts. We have the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. We'll divide those into the three main parts. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It includes the nerve centers for the sensory and motor functions, and the higher mental functions such as memory and reasoning. The corpus callosum connects the left and the right brain. So the left side of the brain controls the right side, and the right side controls the left side of the body. So that is that would be in the center of the brain. So we have the lobes, and you should know this due to both the brain hat, and this is similar to the skull bones. So the same words will be used, or labels. So the frontal, you'll be responsible for knowing these: the reasoning, personality, motor skills. The temporal lobe, which is the frontal would be the blue, temporal would be the green, and this is for the obviously auditory, since it's near the ear, language, and memory. The parietal, which would be the yellow, which would be spatial awareness and perception. And then the pink would be the occipital, and that would be for eyesight and visual information. All right, so those are the cerebrum lobes, and we haven't talked about this, the bottom gray area, which we will later. So this is just a side note. Sometimes, depending on whom you speak with or read about, the insula could be considered the fifth lobe. It is located deep between the temporal lobes. Okay. So sensory and motor. The sensory interpret impulses from the sensory receptors. So it would be producing feelings and sensations, and that was located all throughout the brain. Association areas, so those are what we call neither sensory or motor, and those interpret and analyze data. Also responsible for memory, reasoning, and judgment, and they're also located throughout the brain. Motor, on the other hand, just located in the frontal lobes, and those interact with the skeletal muscle fibers. Okay, so here's our, I'll probably have to fix this. I don't know with the cerebrum. I'll have to fix that real quick while we do this. I know it's, so here's the cerebrum, right? Whoops. Oh, I don't know why it didn't change. Okay, so this is cerebrum. The corpus callosum, what we talked about, separates the right and left spheres. So that would be this function here, this part here. The cerebellum is that area that we, on the bottom of the brain that we didn't identify with the lobes. And then we have the midbrain, and then we have the pons and the medulla oblongata. So the medulla is this upper area here. The pons is in the middle, and the medulla oblongata is on the bottom, and that makes up the brain stem. Okay, so this is considered the brain stem, and the brain stem contains the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. All right, the hypothalamus would be this area within here, and then we have the pituitary gland, which is right underneath it. Okay, so hypothalamus, and we'll talk about the pineal gland later. All right, so this is the pituitary. All right, so between the hemispheres, we have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, optic tracts, pituitary gland, and pineal gland. This is considered the diencephalon. The diencephalon. That's how we pronounce that. Di meaning two, and then the encephalon, right? Diencephalon. All right. The limbic system consists of the hypothalamus, which regulates the heart rate, blood pressure. So homeostasis for the most part, right? So you can see all the things that it regulates. Pretty important part, right? Sleep, gland excretions, or secretions, I should say, and it also stimulates the pituitary gland, and we saw that a little bit with the before when we talked about homeostasis. And it's also the awareness of the sensory stimulation, and it also controls emotional experience and expression. So that would be the limbic system. The brainstem, as I mentioned before, it contains the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. As you can see, it connects the cerebrum to the spinal cord. The midbrain is responsible for reflex. Pons is responsible for breathing rhythm and communicates with the cerebellum. And the medulla oblongata controls the heart rate, blood pressure, rate and depth of breathing, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing and vomiting. Okay, so that you can see the green areas here. So we have the midbrain, or the different color, midbrain, pons, and then the medulla oblongata. And you can see that the pons is connected to the cerebellum right here. So this is where that communication takes place. Cerebellum, this is that big area on the bottom, responsible for body position, balance, posture, and coordination. So that's pretty much done with the identification aspect and the function, but we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system. So this is the peripheral nervous system. This functions independently, right? So this is important because it doesn't need any stimulus. It just, in a sense that it needs to happen involuntarily, right? So that's, the smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle, things that you don't need to think about. It does respond to stress and physical activity, and it's divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. The sympathetic, the nerves come from the thoracic and the lumbar regions. This is our fight or flight response. All right. Parasympathetic comes from the brainstem and the sacral region of the spinal cord. So that would be resting conditions, right? So sympathetic is fight or flight, parasympathetic resting, and they work together to maintain homeostasis. All right, so that's it for essential question number 2. Go ahead and we will interact with those notes, and I will put an assignment up on Canvas.